Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Alexander with the Saratoga Springs Public Library, and we're thrilled to be co-hosting this program with Adirondack Mountain Club. And tonight's program is going to have Dan Kelting, as a speaker, and I'm going to let Sarah introduce him. And at this point, I'd like to introduce Sarah King. She's the head of programs for the Adirondack Mountain Club, and she's going to introduce Professor Dan Kelting, the director of Paul Smith's Adirondack Watershed Institute. Thank you. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, well, you've just taken everything I wanted to say, Chris. Welcome, everybody. Dan Kelting is with us tonight from Paul Smith, and he will be speaking on the modern threats to age-old Adirondack waterways. Just a little bio on Dan. He has joined the faculty of Paul Smith in 2003 as executive director of the Adirondack Watershed Institute. And from 1999 to 2003, he was the faculty member at North Carolina State University. He served as co-director of the Forest Nutrition Cooperative and assistant professor in the Department of Forestry. We're very happy to have him tonight. We originally had this program scheduled for last spring, but then COVID hit, so here we are now in September, and we're happy that you could all join us. So Dan, so the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah, and good evening, everyone. Also, thank you, Chris, at the library for hosting this event tonight. As Sarah mentioned, this was originally going to be a spring of 20 live presentation, imagine that, but now we've got it going on via Zoom. So it is my pleasure to join you this evening. And yes, my name is Dan Kelting. I am the executive director of the Paul Smith College Adirondack Watershed Institute. And tonight I'm going to be talking to you about a modern threat to our age-old waters, and that is aquatic invasive species. And what I'll be covering tonight are first how these organisms get to where they are, their barriers that they have to overcome, what organisms we have currently in the Adirondack waters, why we care about these organisms, and perhaps most importantly, what we're doing about them now to prevent more organisms from entering the park and prevent the spread of the current ones that we know are in the Adirondacks. So I know you're members of the Adirondack Mountain Club, so Adirondack waters are near and dear to all of your hearts. So I just want to show a couple of my favorites. We have Pico Lake down in the southern Adirondacks, Indian Lake, central Adirondacks, looking at Blue Mountain Lake. Many of you probably climbed up on this prominence, enjoyed this view. Long Lake, also in the central Adirondacks. We have Upper Saranac Lake, just south of where I am right now. Mirror Lake, which a lot of people probably think is Lake Placid, but we all know it's not, it's Mirror Lake. And those are all, certainly these are all what we would call more developed lakes, ones that we can get to in a motorboat from a launch. But we're all on this call probably very familiar with this iconic water body, Lake Colvin, which is only accessible by a good foot traffic. I actually hiked back here last Friday. I took a staycation last week and just hiked the day hikes every day to refamiliarize myself with our beautiful Adirondacks. So these are eight lakes in the Adirondacks, and you probably all know that we actually have over 3,000 lakes. If you add the ponds, we have about 11,000 water bodies in the Adirondacks and over 30,000 miles of rivers and streams. So we're a region that has just tremendous water resources. And again, as members of the club, you're all very familiar. You probably got your boots wet a few times too, crossing some of these streams. These lakes, so the time of my talk, the ancient waterways, these are ancient. Their ancientness comes from, if you look at the image on the bottom from Indian Lake, you can see the rock. That's an orthosite. So that's one of our basement rocks in the Adirondacks. That rock right there, if you step on that with your boot, you're stepping on a surface that's 1.2 billion years old. So this is truly an ancient landscape. And so these lakes that we see and enjoy now, they are about 10,000 years old, and over that 1.2 billion time frame between the rock being formed and the lakes being visible, there was serious geological forces happening that resulted in the basic shapes of our water bodies. So they truly are ancient, and what we're seeing now is the result of a geology geologic events combined with glaciology carving out and leaving back our Adirondack lakes for us. So it is an ancient landscape, and we all of us, myself included, love our Adirondack lakes. We have events like the 90 miler, so I live in the village of Saranac Lake, so the terminus of the 90 is in Lake Flower. I live across the street from Lake Flower. We love to recreate on the water, so I'm a big sailor too. This is my son down here in the kayak, and this is actually the inlet to Chattahoochee Lake up in the northern Adirondacks. And of course, there's Mirror Lake again. So a variety of different recreational opportunities being pursued here on our waters. And as a resident of the Adirondacks, someone who chose to move here really largely to have access to our forests and our streams, this is very vital to myself, and certainly our waters are vital to our economy, our socioeconomic well-being. So maintaining clean water, our lakes and our rivers, is central to the welfare of the people that live in the Adirondacks. So just some statistics to back that up. Over $1.2 billion are expended by visitors to the Adirondacks every year, providing about 26,000 jobs. And what do visitors do? Well, most of them want to stay by the water. They want to stay at the Mirror Lake Inn, or they want to pitch their tent on one of the Saranac Islands. They come to swim, fish, or boat. So clean water is vital to our economy, as you can see. And then waterfront property, if any of you are summer residents in the park or you have shoreline property, you know that your property is highly taxed. And so that's a major source of revenue for our towns, and which is very important to support our schools, so our kids can get a good education. So clean water is a big part of that story. So we have this great resource, but this resource is under a number of modern threats to the quality of these waters, and you're probably familiar with most of these. So one of them has been air pollution. This has been a serious threat for probably the past 75 years. So we're talking about coal-fired power plants, internal combustion engines, fossil fuel combustion, nitric acid, sulfuric acid, mercury deposition. They've had a major impact on our waters in the Adirondacks. Development, so improper shoreline development. You can see here this land was cleared, and we have sedimentation, probably nutrients going into this particular water body. More recently, we have road salt. You're probably familiar with this issue. So we salt our roads as part of winter road management, but the consequences one of the consequences of that is widespread salinization, or increases in salt concentrations in our lakes, our streams, and also our groundwater. So it was very serious implications for ecosystems and also human health. And lastly, the most recent threat to our waters is aquatic invasive species, which is the focus of my talk tonight. And so we have up there Eurasian water milfoil, which I'll talk about, and below that, the bottom panel is Asian clam, which I'll talk about both of these organisms tonight. So these are the modern threats to Adirondack waters, recognizing that our waters have been here for a very, very long time, and the changes that have been imposed on them have actually only happened in the very recent past. So we're going to talk now about aquatic invasive species. So I want to start with the official definition of what these organisms are. So they can be plants or animals, and the first key is they're non-native, so they're not from here. For aquatic invasives, they have to live primarily in water, but they can spend part of their life cycle or time on land or perhaps traveling between water bodies. They're organisms that thrive, not just persist, but thrive in their new environment. And lastly, what's very important to note is they have to cause some kind of harm. So either economic loss, environmental damage, or harm to human health. So non-native, lives in water, thrives in the new environment, and causes loss, damage, or harm. So if the organism meets all of these criteria, it's considered an aquatic invasive species. So based on these criteria, we have 98 known lakes with aquatic invasive species in the Adirondack shown here with all these black dots. And this data is collected largely through the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program, but also through volunteers, through the Adirondack Mountain Club, through work that we've done through our program at the Adirondack Watershed Institute. So these dots represent the efforts of a number of organizations that have worked together to monitor our surface waters to understand where and what invasives we have in the Adirondack. So this is the distribution, the current distribution of aquatic invasive species in Adirondack waters. 98 known lakes. Remember, we have over 3,000. So in terms of a percentage infested, it's a small. We believe it's a fairly small number, but they tend to be the water bodies that people visit the most. So how do these organisms get established? Well, there's a whole process of invasion that must happen for these species to become established. And I want to walk through this in detail for you. First, the organism, be it plant or animal, has to be introduced to that water body. And as part of my narrative tonight, I'll refer to boats. So boats and their trailers and associated equipment are the main vector by which invasive species are introduced to our lakes and our streams. But after they are introduced, they have to become established. So there's an introduction, there's establishment, and what that means is a self-sustaining population has to be established. If they're animals, they have to be able to have offspring. If they're plants, they have to be able to cross-pollinate or have other mechanisms of spreading through clonal propagation or other means. Then they expand, so they have to take over habitat that's occupied by other organisms. And eventually they'll be considered what's called naturalized. They'll be just part of the community. They're not natural, but they're just part of that overall aquatic ecosystem. Once the organisms are at the expansion and naturalization phase, you can see these arrows kind of go back to introduction. There's enough of those organisms in the water body so that they can be taken up by boats and other methods to be taken to another water body and introduced and spread around. So this is the basic process. I want to show you two in other ways. So here we're looking at area of the water body occupied as a function of time. I don't put actual years on here, but this is time zero to some time in the future. And you're looking at a growth curve. So it takes a while for the organisms to become established. They grow quickly and then they occupy all the space. I apologize for that orange. You're probably seeing an orange window. It's something that just started showing up on my computer, so hopefully you can just kind of ignore it. So the introduction phase. So the organisms are released into the new environment. In our case, imagine a boat backing down at a launch site, and there's some material on the propeller, and it gets released into the lake. So that would be the introduction phase. Establishment, the organisms are now reproducing. If they're plants, they're flowering, they're pollinating, they are forming seeds for new offspring. So we're forming a self-sustaining population. That's going to take some time. Then there's a population expansion. The organisms are outcompeting the native organisms, and their population is increasing. And then finally, we have they are just part of the system. They are now naturalized, and this takes time. So this isn't a process that for most organisms it's going to happen over a period of a few years. Typically, we're talking a process that takes decades, although for some organisms it can be quicker. But for most particularly the ones we have now, it's a process that takes decades. I want to talk now about the establishment process. So introductions happen all the time, but whether or not the organism gets established, the organism actually has to overcome a number of very important variables before it can actually become successfully established. And if that organism can overcome all those variables, then it's actually an aquatic invasive species. It's able to make it through all the barriers to its potential success. So let's talk about the barriers to a successful establishment of an aquatic invasive species. So here we're going to look at, I just have 5 fictitious organisms. I call them A, B, C, and D. Okay, so the first question is, can the organism even get there? So we call this a geographical barrier. So can that plant or animal actually get to that water body? So in this case, we see that organism A is not able to get there. So it's not going to be able to become established. The second barrier is what we call a physiological barrier. Can the organism grow there? Is the water too cold? Is it too hot? Is it too acidic? Is it too salty? Does it not have enough calcium? Is it too dark? Is it too bright? Are there other variables? Does it have enough oxygen? Are there other factors that are preventing the organism from becoming established? In this example, we see that organism B, the habitat isn't conducive to organism B, so it can't become established. The next one relates to reproduction. Can the organism reproduce? And so we call this the demographic barrier. So can it produce seeds? Can it breed? In this case, organism C is not able to breed or reproduce. So even though it could get there, even though it could survive there, it can't reproduce. It's not going to become established. And lastly, the last barrier is what's called biotic resistance. So are there other organisms within that water body that can prey? So like invertebrates that eat the leaves or the seeds, diseases that may impact the organism. If those are present, then the resistance of the ecosystem will prevent or really slow down the establishment. So we see in this case, organism D can't overcome the resistance, it's not going to become established. So that leaves us with organism E. So it was able to get there. It can grow there. The habitat is suitable. It's able to reproduce. It doesn't have any predators or diseases. It's an aquatic invasive species. So now, these are the barriers so this is a lot. This is a lot that the organism has to go through to be able to become established. So think about an aquatic invasive species. It's pretty remarkable in terms of its abilities. So now I want to take you through some examples of this. So let's talk first about our geographical barriers. And so this is getting there. And first, so this bottom panel, this is showing you surface shipping. So these lines are showing you the shipping lanes, and the darker the color is the amount, and this is on an annual basis. So this yellow line, that's 5,000 trips between Portugal and Florida of a ship. And so the world is connected, right? We're connected via the internet, certainly, but we're connected via shipping. And shipping is a major vector for transporting aquatic invasive species. So particularly animals. So here we see a ship, it's docked at a facility, and what it's doing now, it's offloading its ballast water. So they take on ballast water to control their buoyancy so they're able to be seaworthy when they're crossing the oceans. And when they pump in their ballast water at their port where they're leaving, they're going to suck in the organisms that are near those pumps, bringing them across the ocean and deposit them in waters that don't have those organisms. So the zebra mussel, this one you see here, was an organism that was brought up from Eurasia up through the St. Lawrence River and deposited into the Great Lakes via ballast water. So overcoming a tremendous geographical barrier thousands of nautical miles of travel, but that organism just was in the ballast water. Another example this is particularly for our aquatic plants. There's a tremendous aquarium trade. Aquariums are very popular, as are home aquatic gardens. And so people buy exotic plants that are shipped from other areas. And they establish them in their home ponds or ornamental ponds or in their aquariums, and then they discard they get sick of them and they discard them, or they escape into the surface waters. And a great example of that is the Eurasian water milfoil. So the aquarium trade brought milfoil over, which is from Eurasia, via an aquarium, a purposeful trade of these organisms for people to use in their fish tanks and also their ornamental gardens. So overcoming geographic barriers via shipping and trade, other trade. What about the physiological barriers? So again, this is the habitat quality. And here's an interesting story. This boy, Travis Davis, caught a piranha in Lake Erie in August of 2010. As we all know, piranha, thank God, are not native to the fresh waters of the north. Probably none of us would go swimming again if that were true. Maybe they're not as bad as the movies say they are, but they scare me. So anyway, Travis caught a red-bellied piranha. In that summer, three other people, or two other groups, caught piranha in Lake Erie. But so how did the piranha get in Lake Erie? Well, it was someone's piranha. It was their fish they were growing in their fish tank. Probably got too big and they threw it in the lake. And so the piranha was able to live in the lake for a little while, but the lake gets too cold. The piranha is a tropical fish. It needs warm water year round. So it was able to survive in August, but as soon as it got cold and into the fall and the winter and the water temperature dropped into the 50 degrees, the fish died. So it wasn't able to overcome the physiological barrier. So the piranha can't get established, which is a good thing. Unlike one of our invasives that I'll talk about, Eurasian water milfoil. So this particular aquatic invasive plant is found in waters in Florida, all the way up through into Canada. So it can exist across a broad range of temperature thresholds in water. So temperature doesn't affect it. It can exist across a broad range of water chemistry. So lakes that we consider low nutrient lakes to high nutrient lakes. It can exist in fresh water to saline water. You'll find this particular plant growing in the Chesapeake Bay. So it's extremely adaptable. And it can grow in still water to flowing water, slowly moving water. So there's very few physiological barriers to the establishment of the Eurasian water milfoil. Therefore, it's quite successful and can be found in a variety of circumstances. What about demographic barriers? So here, you may have heard of this nice organ. This is northern snakehead. It's from Eurasia. This was caught in Maryland Lake in 2002. It's a male. So it was transported as part of the fish market, and it was released. And the hope was that it was going to reproduce, but they only released a male. The habitat was suitable, so the lake was fine. It could live in the lake, but there was only one. Thank God, only one snakehead. So it couldn't reproduce, so it died. So it wasn't able to overcome the demographic barrier because it doesn't have any mechanism to convert its sex or become a hermaphrodite or anything. So it didn't survive. Contrast that to one of our known aquatic invasive animals, the Asian clam, which is established in the Adirondacks. Asian clam was brought here in ballast water. It can grow in a variety of habitats, so the physiological barriers are low. And Asian clam is hermaphrodite. So it can self-fertilize. And one single adult, like you're seeing here, can produce 35,000 larvae. And so you might have in a bed of Asian clam 100 adults, each one producing 35,000 larvae. What's that? 3.5 million larvae produced by by 100 adults in an area the size of like a Frisbee. So no problem with the demographics for Asian plant, which is true for most of the animals can self-fertilize. So we get down through to the bottom. So the last piece, the biotic resistance, again, I can't give you an example, but presence of a predators, competitors, or disease precludes establishment of a potential invader. So one of the issues here is when these organisms come here, they're transported long distances. They don't come with their natural predators. And oftentimes they're not preferred food for what is already there. So they come with an advantage of being without predators, and that really helps them become successful. So if we boil all this down to what makes a successful aquatic invasive species, they all have the following characteristics. They have a high tolerance for transportation, so meaning they can live in the ballast water of a ship for weeks. They can, in the case of a plant, they can dry out. So we've done some work with Eurasian water milfoil where we've dried it out where it looked dry, put it in water, and it started to grow. So very high tolerance for drying out, which is important for a plant. They have a high environmental tolerance, so they can grow across a broad range of conditions. They reproduce rapidly and usually many different ways. So most of our invasive aquatic plants have at least three ways by which they can reproduce. Animals, 2 ways. And they're very aggressive and competitive. So they grow quickly and they take up the space of the natives very quickly. So those are the characteristics of the organisms. So once an aquatic invasive species is established in one water body, then it is able to move to other water bodies. And again, the main mechanisms by which they move would be via boats and trailers. And what you're looking at here is first look at the park maps. There's the blue line. And the star in the center, so we have people stationed at boat launch sites. We probably met them, our stewards who are doing boat inspection. And so they ask each boater, where are you coming from? Where have you been the last 2 weeks? And so we're able to develop these maps of boater movement. And you can see that, so boats launching into Second Pond, which is part of the Saranac Lake chain, are coming from all over. They're coming from the St. Lawrence River, from the Finger Lakes, Lake Erie, from the Atlantic Ocean, coming from areas that have other invasive species in them. So you can see the potential for the transport of organisms to Second Pond. And then what you're seeing here, the bottom inset, is boats going from Second Pond to other lakes. So a boat launches into Second Pond, it drops off a new invader, that goes to Lake Placid and drops off that invader in Lake Placid. So you can see how visually how the organisms would spread around the Adirondacks if we didn't have a mechanism, and we do, and I'll talk about it, for trying to limit their spread through the region. But once they're established, then they're able to be moved around largely through the efforts of boats. So again, we have these 98 known lakes with an AIS, and they are there through this process that I just described. So who are these lake invaders? Well, we currently have 6 species of aquatic invasive plants and 3 species of aquatic invasive animals that we know of. I give you the common name, the scientific name, and the year that they were first recorded. So our first one that we believe arrived first was water chestnut. And so we're not sure when that arrived. It would have been through the trade for ornamental ponds. It's very popular. It's actually quite a beautiful plant when it's not in abundance, but it came in probably in the 1800s. So been here for a long time. Eurasian water milfoil came in the 1970s. Curly-leaf pondweed, 1990. Fanwort, 1994. Another milfoil species, 2002, and the European frogbit, which we find in rivers, in 2005. So with the exception of water chestnut, and Eurasian water milfoil, most of these organisms are relatively new to the Adirondacks, so coming in the 90s. Looking at the animals, we have three. We have the zebra mussel, which was first detected in Lake Champlain in 1993, so relatively recent. We have spiny water flea, which is recent, first detected in the southern Adirondacks in 2008. And then we have Asian clam, which was first detected in 2010. So these are the organisms. Now I want to talk you through each of the basic groupings and why we're concerned about these organisms being in our water bodies here in the Adirondacks and other New York waters. First, looking at the plants, here's some visuals. So they're actually quite beautiful when they are alone. So see, here we have water chestnut. It's a free-floating plant. It exists in these rosettes. So you can see here, there's these little swollen areas. These are actually bladders full of air, which allow the plant to float in the water column. It produces these big nutlets or seeds that sink to the bottom and allow new plants to grow. Next to that, we have Eurasian water milfoil. Eurasian is giving you the origin, again, Eurasia. Water milfoil is the species, or rather the genus. And you can see how there's these beautiful feathery leaves, which is a characteristic of the milfoil species, these feathery leaves. Next to that, we have curly leaf pondweed, which gets its name through the leaves. You can see they're curly. And actually, they're very stiff too. They're kind of like ravioli. They feel like ravioli, the edges of ravioli. This is getting to be a more common aquatic plant. Down in the bottom corner, we have fanwort. You can see it's shaped like a fan that gives it the name. Here's our other milfoil species shown directly under Eurasian. And variable leaf, you can see they're quite similar. They have that same kind of a beautiful feathery like leaf. And then European frogbit is also a free-floating plant, just like water chestnut. It has these beautiful flowers, but again, it's an invasive species that can really take over a lot of areas. So why do we care? Why do we care about these plants? Why are they such a great concern for us? So if we look at them individually, that they're certainly not an issue. But what happens is through the establishment and the expansion phase, they end up forming these very dense beds of single species. So here we have a bed of variable leaf milfoil. You can see it's very dense. You couldn't boat through that. You certainly couldn't swim in it. The fish that you would find in there would be very small, so it's going to select for smaller fish. Here is a bed of curly leaf pondweed, same thing. I'm taking up a lot of space. Here is a bed of Eurasian water milfoil. Here is a bed of European frogbit, and here is a bed of water chestnut. So all these plants have one thing in common. They all form dense mats or dense beds. And so why we care about that is literally reducing opportunities for boating and swimming. Depending on the depth of the water body, these could take over the entire surface area of the water body and render it useless for recreational purposes. Certainly reduces the aesthetic value and therefore the values and properties associated with the water body. Reduced water clarity. We have a lot of energy, a lot of mass here. These plants all die back in the fall, and there's a lot of nutrient loading into the water columns. There's a lot of algae blooms that can happen, big reductions in water clarity and oxygen in the water. And it can change the fishery. So for anglers, there is certainly a problem in terms of the fishery, what fish species are there and the sizes of the fish that are there are affected by the presence and abundance of these organisms. So very profound changes when you have these plants in abundance in the lake. What about the animals? So we look at zebra mussel here as a zebra pattern, which gives it its common name. Forms these very dense crusts on rocks and also on our infrastructure. Very common to see on and in pipes. So clogging intakes for municipal water systems, for private water systems, requiring expensive dive operations to clean them out. These zebra mussels mobilize nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, and this nitrogen P is phosphorus, which are essential elements to support algal growth and productivity in the lake, so can change water quality in profound ways. Spiny water flea is an invasive invertebrate or insect. You can see it up here. It actually has its big spine on its back, which gives it its name. It's not a food source for most fish species. Don't want to eat it because it's got that big spine on it. It's a voracious predator, so meaning it eats a lot of the other invertebrates that the fish would normally eat. So it's out competing the fish, and then the fish don't eat it. So it's really changing the quality of the food for the fishery, and thus affecting that. And it's very sticky, so it sticks to the fishing gear. And you can see the spiny water flea, and you can see the spine stuck to this leader. Asian clam, very similar concerns as zebra mussel, biofouling, and also mobilizing nutrients. You can see here, this is a bed of Asian clam, and right above that bed, this is actually an algal bloom. So the algae have formed right there. The water's clear enough to provide a light source. So you see the algae feeding off the nutrients that are being mobilized by this organism. So again, just like with the plants, some profound changes associated with the invasion of these organisms. So what's the current distribution of these organisms in the Adirondacks? So Eurasian water milfoil we see in green. We have currently about 60 lakes that we know of that have Eurasian water milfoil. First detection, 1973, was in Chatier Lake in the northern Adirondacks. Thought to be brought in probably from Canada, which has earlier reports of invasions in Canada, just north, and also the St. Lawrence River just north of here. Next is variable leaf milfoil. It's our second most common aquatic invasive plant, shown here in orange. 43 lakes that we know of. Interestingly, most of the invasions tend to be invaded lakes tend to be in the western portion of the Adirondacks. If we look to the east, like into Vermont and New Hampshire, we don't have any reported invasions of variable leaf. Most of the invasions we see are west. So we believe the invasion front for variable is coming from western water bodies. And so that's why we see it mainly in the western part of the Adirondacks. Another feature you see on here is you can see these four dots kind of along next to each other. This is very common. So this is the Cary Falls Reservoir system. So these are all connected water bodies. Once you get in the days of established in one connected water body, it's very easy for them to move between the other ones. So you think about the Saranac chain or the Fulton chain. Those are all infested with the same invasives because of the connectivity of the water bodies. Curly-leaf pondweed. So variable leaf was 2002, so more recent. Curly-leaf pondweed, we have a few infestations, 15 that we know of. First reported in 1990 down Lake Luzerne, down in the southeastern, well, down sort of in the not quite down to Saratoga, but that neck of the woods, I suppose. So a few infestations down there, but we're seeing some spread up into the northern Adirondacks and into the Saranac chain as well. European frogbit, fewer infestations. We're seeing this primarily in rivers. It was first reported in 2005 in the western Adirondacks in the Grass River. It has since been cited in a few spots in the eastern Adirondacks and also in Lake Champlain. And lastly, fanwort, we have a few infestations. We first reported in 1994 in a couple of small private ponds just inside the park down near Great Sacandaga, but we've had a recent report further north up north of Schroon Lake, up near Lincoln Pond. Water chestnut, we have Saratoga Lake. We have a small lake in near Glen Lake, near Lake George, and of course we have water chestnut well established in the southern reaches of Lake Champlain. And again, we're not certain when this happened. It was probably in the 1800s, so it's been here for a while. So 94 lakes with aquatic invasive plants. Looking at the animals, spiny water flea, we have 8. Most of them in the southern Adirondacks. First report was 2008, was actually in I'm banking on the name of the lake. It wasn't Paseco. It was not Paseco Lake. The name will come to me in a minute, but it was one of the lakes down that way was reported in 2008. And we've since seen it more recently reported in Lake George, and the most recent report actually was Lake Champlain. So spiny water flea is moving around. The zebra mussel, we have two infestations, one in the Adirondacks, Lake Champlain, Lake George, and then we also have Saratoga Lake. Zebra mussel has very specific requirements for its survival and growth in terms of calcium. It needs a lot of calcium. So there's a physiological barrier to zebra mussel becoming well established in the Adirondacks. We do have a fair amount of calcium locked up in our rocks, but our rocks weather very slowly for the most part. So we have very low calcium in our waters. So there are very few lakes in the internal Adirondacks that actually can support zebra mussels. Lake Champlain has limestone, and it's a lot of limestone, which is calcium carbonate. It's quite a bit of limestone in Lake George watershed. So they're being, and also in Saratoga Lake. So there's limestone sources for calcium in those watersheds that allow that species to thrive in those environments that it can't in the other ones. So the physiological barriers really preventing zebra mussel from becoming widely established in the Adirondacks. Lastly, Asian clam, we have one infestation within the Adirondack Park, and that's Lake George. And we're very fortunate that that's the only place it's at. It could do quite well in other water bodies in the Adirondacks. It does not have the physiological barriers to growth and reproduction that the zebra mussel has. But there's been a huge effort, as you may be aware of, to control Asian clam and also put a wall around Lake George, if you will, to prevent this organism from escaping and invading other water bodies. So that's the current picture of what's here and where you can see these organisms are widely distributed throughout the Adirondacks, with the most common being Eurasian and variable leaf milfoil in terms of our plants, and spiny water flea being most common in terms of invasive animals. So that's the picture. I want to spend a couple of minutes talking to you about what's being done. So what is being done to control the spread of these organisms? The first thing I want you to know about is we actually have a management plan. So a number of years ago, over 14 years ago, a management plan was approved. It was a grassroots effort to form this plan. And it has 3 goals. One is to prevent new organisms from entering the Adirondacks. The second goal is to prevent or limit the spread of established organisms from moving around the Adirondacks, so keep them where they are. And the third goal is to really do management to abate any negative impacts that have occurred as a result of infestation. So that's basically managing infestation. So I'm going to quickly go through each of these. So prevention, we have a park-wide program for prevention. And first, I've already mentioned this. There's a tremendous amount of pressure on Adirondack waters for invasive species introductions, and this is coming largely from boats being launched at our public boat launch sites. So we see a truck backing down with the boats on its trailer, and this boat could be hauling aquatic plant material. In this case, this is a wad of Eurasian water milfoil. This one is on exit, but you could imagine that on entry. But what this is showing you is the vector of spread, if you will, not only going in, but if this boat could go to another water body, if they don't take these plants off and they just drop their motor into a new water body, there's a potential infestation happening from the boat leaving, not just entering. So just some statistics. We have over 100 boat launches in the Adirondacks. We have over 30,000 boats launching each summer. This summer, we actually had over 25% increase in boat launchings at the sites that we monitor. We've seen a lot more use of the backcountry ride, really as a response to people wanting to get outdoors because of COVID-19. So increased use of our natural resources has been a side effect of COVID as well. Our boats in the Adirondacks are coming from all over, from other Adirondack waters, other New York waters, but from 40 states, 6 Canadian provinces, all told over 2,700 water bodies. Boats came from over 2,700 water bodies from our data set for 2019. We haven't compiled our data for this, finished compiling our data for this season yet. So you can see a tremendous amount of tremendous opportunity for invasion, tremendous risk for invasion. So what are we doing about that? Well, we maintain, along with our partners, a spread prevention program. So with all these dots on the map are where we have stewards that are stationed for doing boat inspections, boater education, and boat decontamination at critical points throughout the park. We have over 120 stewards that are on duty from Memorial Day through Labor Day, and also some in the Columbus Day weekend, at 46 launches and 26 decontamination sites. And they're working 5 to 7 days a week. And the investment, which largely comes from the people of the state of New York through the Environmental Protection Fund, is about $2 million per year to run this program, which may seem like a lot, but one invasion can cost millions of dollars to control. So this is the ounce of prevention being worth a pound of cure. So, and this program is sponsored by federal funding through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, money in the Lake Champlain Basin Program, which is also federal, and then also the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So what do the stewards do? They're inspecting boats, so they're removing material from boat trailers, from their hulls, doing inspection. See the steward removing plant material from the bunks of the boats. So they're doing the removal of material at launch and also on retrieval. They're also educating the boaters, talking to them why you should care about invasive species, what steps you can take to control spread, because we all know, you all know, that there aren't stewards at every boat launch site, right? So we want people to be educated on proper methodologies. The acronym or not the acronym, but the saying is clean, drain, dry. Clean your surfaces, drain your wells and bilges, and dry your wells and bilges, and haul between your water bodies. So clean, drain, dry is the mantra. So we instill that in boaters, hoping that their behaviors will change and they'll do the right thing when stewards aren't present. And we also perform decontamination, and this is using high pressure hot water systems at these 26 locations. And this is specifically for managing our small bodied organisms, our aquatic animals, our zebra mussel, Asian clam, and spiny water flea, where the only real method for controlling them is through using high pressure hot water contact with hot water will kill the larvae, and then high pressure, of course, scrapes everything off. So and this is also done in the flushing intake system for the motors as well. Another piece, so that's prevention. Another piece that is done, and this is managed through the Nature Conservancy Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program, is there's a professional team that does surveillance all summer, as well as there's volunteers that do it. You know, the ADK has a group of volunteers. They go out in the backcountry looking for invasives. And there's also other programs that exist. Lake associations monitor their own lakes. So we're looking for new invasions. So the idea here is if you catch a new invasion early, we have an opportunity to go in there and eradicate the organisms before they become established. Get them at the introduction phase before they can become established. So that's what this team does. And then, so here's an example. This is doing surface survey work from a boat, looking down through the water, throwing nets over to try to capture any invasive planktonic organisms or like the spiny water flea, doing sieving in the sediment, looking for Asian clam, and also doing DNA work, environmental DNA, looking at the DNA in the water and see whether that organism is present or not. So a range of techniques are used for doing the monitoring. And lastly is management, so managing established populations to try to mitigate any harm that's been caused by organisms. And the main method by which organisms are managed is what we call mechanical, and it's using divers. So you see on here, there are divers, these two folks here. They are receiving air from the surface. You can see this hose. And in these bags are plant material, in this case, Eurasian water milfoil, which you can see down here in the main boat. So they're down there underwater, removing plants by hand, lifting them up by the root systems, filling them up into the bag. It's basically underwater weeding. It's a little more than that. It's actually got some technicality to it, but it's very, very difficult, very challenging work. But it's called diver hand harvesting, which is the main method that is used currently for controlling established populations of aquatic invasive plants. Another methodology that is used is what we call benthic matting. So here you can see a crew laying a sheet of plastic essentially over a bed of plant material, but you can also lay these plastic sheets over beds of Asian clam, over beds of zebra mussels, which can starve them of oxygen and also cause them to perish as well. So this mechanical method of benthic barriers is used not just for plants, but also for animals. More recently on the scene is we're seeing broader use of chemicals. So there are a whole family of chemicals that are being explored to be used in the Adirondacks. The most recent one being Procelacor, which was applied, it looks like successfully in Minerva Lake. So down in the town of Minerva, down in the Lake Luzerne area. But there's a number of chemicals that are available. Sonar is used quite a bit in Saratoga Lake, but we are in the Adirondacks. We are concerned about the environment. We're concerned about human health effects. So there's a lot of discussion around the use of chemicals and the cost benefits of using chemicals to control our aquatic invasive species here in the Adirondacks. But they're becoming more and more of interest in addition to using the mechanical methods that I just quickly went through. In terms of the overall management picture, the red dots are showing you which lakes of the ones that are known to have invasives are currently being managed. So 29 of the lakes are currently being managed. So that's 40% of the total are under some kind of management. So that, in one sense, you could say that's good. There's some work going on, but it's not everywhere, but there's some work going on to manage these infestations. In terms of what organisms are being managed, 25 water bodies are being managed for Eurasian water milfoil. That's 42% of the total managed lakes. 5 are being managed for variable leaf, and then 6 for curly leaf pondweed. And Asian clam is all being managed in Lake George, although they're having it's a challenging situation down there. All right, just so we'll wrap up. So I just want to leave you with a couple of take-home messages. First, aquatic invasive species may be a new term for a lot of people. It's become part of common language in the last few years, but these organisms have been present in our region for decades. Certainly, we know that Eurasian water milfoil since the 1970s and water chestnut and many years before that. We find that these organisms are most common in what we call developed lakes, and I put that in quotes. So these are lakes with easy access, typically with a public boat ramp, typically with quite a bit of shore ownership. So private homes on the shoreline, often not just seasonal, but year-round residents, so greater use, greater recreational use on the water bodies. It's very rare to find an aquatic invasive species in an undeveloped water body. I've only observed Eurasian water milfoil in one, actually two lakes in the Adirondacks that don't have motorboats on them, that don't have that are only car top. So it's much rarer to observe, but it does happen, but it's more rare. And lastly, I want to leave you with really the good news. There's a large effort underway to protect Adirondack waters from invasive species. First, with prevention, which is the biggest and most important piece, with stewards at boat launch sites, with decontamination stations, but also with surveillance, going around with volunteers from the club and others, with the paid team from the Nature Conservancy, and also with prioritized management. So all these different approaches are trying to work together to protect all these waters that all of us love. They're near and dear to our hearts. And so I would hope that you all support the efforts, support the work that's done to protect Adirondack waters, and volunteer. If you're a canoeist, you can volunteer to participate with APIP and others to do some survey work, to keep your eyes out for these organisms and help report when we see them, so we can do management on them before they become a problem. So with that, I will conclude, and I appreciate the time this evening to talk about aquatic invasive plants, which are one of our modern threats to our age-old waters in the Adirondacks.